Thank you, listeners, for joining us for this episode of Wellness Wednesday for the month of August. It is time to get back to class. And in for today's conversation from Vitality Unlimited, the VIPs, we have Mariann Vicki, who is Vitality Unlimited Outreach and Partnership Development Specialist, along with Vicki LaVersa, Eastern Nevada Behavioral Health Operations Coordinator. She is an internationally certified alcohol and drug counselor with Vitality Unlimited. And we're going to open the topic with kind of the stress of getting back to school, right? And I guess, Mariann, is that something you want to lead us in on?
Yeah, it's one of those things that a lot of things bring out stresses in your life. And I think one of those big ones for children and for their parents, and actually maybe even the whole community, is that going back to school. We're getting close to school starting up. I know sometimes I get frustrated. I'm like, oh, I have to wait on a school bus, or there's just so many different things that can bring in those stressors, and we want to remind people that Vitality is here. So when you're going through those life stressors, you might want to talk to somebody about it and figure out different ways to cope with it, and Vitality is one of those ways.
Thanks, Mariann. So, Vicki, maybe you have some tips or some clues or even some little-known facts about the stress that could be associated with going back to school.
Well, absolutely. When we talk about returning to school, not only are we talking about children who have had free range throughout the summer are now being requested to come back into the structure of the community or the structure of the school schedule. You know, it's a Monday through Thursday. From beginning to end, it can be very difficult to adjust. And so what we find not only is the struggle that the adjustment in which adolescents will have in entering school, but also the parents who may have the financial burdens of preparing these, children to return to school. I remember a big thing used to be school shopping. Ooh, how fun was that? But if you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 children, it can be burdensome. And so there certainly can be some financial issues that come into play. The wonderful thing about Vitality is that with the school schedule being Monday through Thursday, we have a lot of available spots on Friday. And so children don't necessarily have to miss school. They can come in, we can schedule and really work around the parents' schedule as well, and be able to manage and kind of help them adjust.
And that's really a good point. And for teachers, too, because staff, there's a certain kind of stress that goes with that.
Absolutely. They begin even sooner than the students do usually. And with teachers, it's not a 40-hour a week. These teachers go in early. They stay late. They see these children that have all kinds of needs and have to address them. And it can be emotionally charging, but also just physically demanding and tiresome. And so, yes, if they have any difficulties or anything along those lines, they can reach out as well.
To Vitality, of course, with the integrated programs, behavioral health services, and Mariann, the best way to make that appointment or reach out?
The best way is just to call us at 775-777-8477. And if you have questions, you can look at our website, which is www.vitalityunlimited.org. And I'd also like to stress that I think it's great that we're available Monday through Friday, but we also have Saturday hours as well, which a lot of places don't. So, and we're open from 8 to 5 on Saturday.
Wow, that is fantastic. That is a great addition, of course, or something you've been doing. Sometimes teenagers and even adults can succumb to, say, peer pressure and getting back into group settings. And Mariann, did we want to talk about substance abuse as we head back into class?
Yes, there's a lot of different ways that, I know during the summer that kids are out and about and hanging out with their friends. But usually those times when I was a teenager that you would run into that peer pressure was usually during the school year, and the more likely time to happen. And one of the things that we wanted to talk about is the fact that teenagers in Nevada are 22, almost 23% more likely to have used drugs in the last month than the average American teen. So that, to me, that's a big number to me.
That is startling, definitely. And Vicki is our operations coordinator and the person who helps to administer the type of counseling. You know how detrimental substance abuse can be, especially with teenagers or even young adults. They're not really fully formed yet.
No, absolutely. The brain is still developing. And when we begin to introduce substances, the earlier the age, then the more problematic it becomes. And what we're doing is developing really kind of the foundation in which substance use disorders will continue to develop. And so it really impacts the brain significantly with memory, with attention span. You know, I when I teach clients, I talk about, keeping the first string out in the field. And when we use substances, whatever substances they may be, they impact the prefrontal cortex first. And that's the first string. And so then not only do we bring out the second string of life, is then they're impaired as well. So picture that, second string, and then under the influence. And it can be really difficult. We want to keep that first string out in the field at all times. So, impulse management, emotion management, our ability to concentrate, remember, attention to detail is all impacted when we use substances, whatever they may be.
Well, and isn't it true for both of you in your profession, don't you find, Mariann, that often people that are suffering an addiction, an abuse issue, they didn't want for that to happen. That wasn't the intention.
Oh, absolutely not. I mean, so many of the people that are using a substance improperly, if they're a prescription drug that they're using improperly or overdosing or using more of than they should, or if it's an illicit drug, a lot of times that stems back to they have a mental health issue that hasn't been addressed. And well, we see it in Vitality. About 92% of the people who come through that are being treated by us for substance use also have another mental health issue going on. So it's not something that people want. Nobody starts out in life saying, hey, I want to be a drug user and get addicted to something. That's not something that people do. It just, life happens and things happen, and we're here to hopefully alleviate that and help them deal with their substance use disorder.
There are several special events coming up, and we want to emphasize that primary care, behavioral health, substance abuse treatment is all as close as a phone call away, as you offer a practice without walls, Mariann.
Yes, we do, and we want to emphasize to everybody that if you can't come to us for services, we can go to you. So, and a lot of people still don't know we've been providing mobile therapy for a year now, and they don't realize that we have that ability. And we've lost a lot of the transportation in this town. So, when you don't have the ability to come to the clinic, you can still call us, you can still set up an appointment. Just let us know that you need our mobile therapy van, and we can bring the appointment to you anywhere in Elko County. And if anybody still wants more information or just wants to learn more about our services, you can always visit with me at some of the different events that we attend. We've, National Night Out we always go to every year, but also we will be at the Native American Health Fair. That's going to be on August 20th, and that's from 9 a.m. until noon at Indian Health Services. So we've been going there, I think, the last 3 years.
Great. Thank you so much for reminding us of that, Mariann. And again, we just want to remind listeners that our certified community behavioral health clinic is right here in Elko, Bluffs Avenue, and you can visit online to get more information about how to schedule, vitalityunlimited.org. I believe you also have a great Facebook page.
Yes, we do. We have 4 Facebook pages because we have one for each of our CCBHCs, but I try to make anything specific to Elko is on our Elko Facebook page.
Oh, so find out more by calling 775-777-8477. That's the number even in case of crisis. So that is the crisis line 24/7 as well. 988 if you or someone you care for is experiencing a mental health crisis in addition to that. But sometimes people drop into this addiction casually, Mariann, like with the introduction of marijuana, with it being legal in Nevada now, that can be confusing.
I think it's one of those things that I was kind of surprised how much it's growing. I looked on the National Center for Drug Abuse Statistics, and it said that basically 10.24% of 12 to 17-year-olds report using drugs in the last month. That, to me, when I saw the number 12, that a 12-year-old could be using drugs, that to me is huge. But then it said among them, almost 92% report using marijuana. So, and it's really growing. We have 16.65% of all 12 to 17-year-olds report using marijuana in the last year. That's not legal for any of them. I mean, people keep saying, oh, marijuana is legal in Nevada. Not if you're under 21, it's not. Just like alcohol. So the fact that that's really growing can be a really scary issue for parents.
And what we find too, and I think this is the biggest problem coming from a perspective of being a counselor and specializing in substance use, is that this is not the marijuana of the 60s. And I want to make that really clear. A lot of people think, oh, it's just weed. If I had $1 every time I heard I was just weed, I wouldn't have to work. Because it's not about just being weed. The reality is the potency that we have developed and the skills that we've developed in potentiating the these psychoactive properties has just grown exponentially. This is not the marijuana of the 60s and 70s, which was 6 to 7% potency. Now we're up in the 90s. And what we're finding is that when we introduce a substance that has that amount of psychoactive substance, what happens is it significantly impacts the developing brain, but also the brain that's already developed. And we're seeing a lot of mental health issues that occur based on that. And so to think it's just marijuana, that, oh, I'd rather have my kids smoking weed than doing the hard stuff, believe me, they will begin to significantly experience the difficulties the quote-unquote hard stuff has, and will become just as problematic.
And one of the things I'd love to bring up, because Vicki told me, and I hear a lot from people, you can't overdose on marijuana. So that's why they think it's safe. But Vicki was telling me that you can. You can.
I knew of a client that I worked with that had THC gummies and had forgotten and were eating them all throughout the day, in which began the overdosing of THC and became catatonic and had to be admitted into the local ER. And so one way of treating that is through other medication. But yeah, it's overdosing. Not overdosing like fentanyl and heroin, in which you die, but it is overdosing, and there's significant problems. And so, yeah, we have to be really careful with the use of marijuana.
But Mariann, as you well know, with your previous involvement in the community as a news reporter and having family in law enforcement, that fentanyl is also destroying a lot of lives and families. I mean, is there hope for fentanyl abusers?
I think there's hope for anybody who's misusing a drug. That's why we have our facilities, to be able to treat and to help them, whether it's inpatient residential or whether it's outpatient. But one of the things I always like to emphasize with people is they need to know, what are you putting in your body? You need to know that you're getting things from a reputable source, because fentanyl is out there and it kills really easily. I was looking up, it's the world's deadliest opioid. And when I was looking up how much fentanyl it takes to be fatal, it's 2 milligrams. It's less than 0.007% of an ounce of fentanyl causes certain death. And I'm like, well, how do I explain to the layperson what the heck is a milligram? I know there's a lot of people out there in the gold industry, they understand what an ounce is, but I looked it up. 1 milligram is half of a small mosquito. So to get 2 milligrams, you have to have the whole mosquito. So that to me it can be very eye-opening of how tiny of an amount of that drug can be certain death. It's death in powder, a pill, whatever.
And we've experienced that in our community, Vicki.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, the scary part is, as you're saying, get it from a reputable source. And we struggle with, people who happen to deal in substances aren't maybe necessarily the most reputable. We've seen in the early days methamphetamine was cut with a little bit of heroin to keep the person sick, and so that they would experience the withdrawal and then come back. And it was a marketing strategy for substance dealers. And so I think it's a really tricky place to be when we're purchasing things. Can we ever really trust what they say?
Mm-hmm. We do talk about that with law enforcement, encouraging folks to just carry Narcan because it seems like this is so prevalent.
Absolutely. And, I like the idea of having it available. I like the idea that when it comes to substance users, we want them to have that available to them as well, because they may need it or may have a peer that needs it as well.
Well, certainly, Vicki, someone with your training and experience, internationally certified, what does, when you ingest drugs like fentanyl, cocaine, heroin, what does that do to the body?
Well, it depends. If it's a stimulant, it stimulates the dopamine and our feel-good chemical to be released, and we call it what is called a dopamine dump, and we get this rush of euphoria. When we're taking a depressive drug, whether it be a selective central nervous system depressant, which is what marijuana is, or alcohol, which is a depressant, or any of the sedatives, it has a calming effect. And so all the stress, all the fear, everything gets brought down. And so again, when we're talking about substance use, we're talking about the inability to manage emotions. It's been called the disease of the feelings. And somewhere along the line, we have not been taught how to manage these feelings. And I would say my experience is that most substance users are they're not insensitive, they're overly sensitive. They feel the emotions to such an extent. And then, of course, it's very human not to want to feel discomfort. It's very human not to want to feel pain. If it's cold, we put a jacket on. If we have a headache, we take an aspirin. And so here we are in sometimes a misguided attempt to solve something, but developing those maladaptive patterns and resolving it.
Wow, Vicki and Mariann, that sounds like a really caring yet professional way to help people understand why it is that they're seeking relief from these kinds of drugs, and then also to help them move forward.
Well, and I think also too that there's a lot of other, people talk about if they use meth, it eats away at your body. It changes how you look. And Vicki told me something that I had no idea, that marijuana can change how you look.
Right. There's a condition called gynecomastia, and I hope I'm saying that correctly. But what it is when we ingest marijuana in any form or fashion, it increases the estrogen level and impacts our hormonal balance, increases the estrogen while decreasing our testosterone. And so what happens is, and particularly in males, is that they will develop breasts. And so a lot of people would think, I'm just kind of getting heavy. It was the munchies, all these things. But no, there's a little bit more going on here. It's really about the hormonal imbalance that marijuana is presenting. And so I don't know that that's a fun fact. It's not fun for the person experiencing it. But here's, just another intake and just another perspective on how substances impact every part of the body.
Well, Vicki, thank you again. The good news is that you can seek help. Vitality Integrated Programs the VIPs are certified community behavioral health clinic, and it is at 215 Bluffs Avenue. You can call them at 775-777-8477. If you checked in the mirror and didn't like what you see, this might be a good opportunity to start to turn things around.